Welcome everybody, welcome all our Torah Anytime viewers. We are learning tonight Eloi Nishmas, Miriam Bas Bracha, Farrell Bas Pinchas, Sarah Rachel Bas Michal, and Michal Ben Eliezer. Okay, so we are continuing and hopefully B'ezrat Hashem also concluding the third and final class on the amazing life, the story of Rabbi Akiva. So we left off last week that Rabbi Akiva's first wife actually, Rachel, passed away. And shortly after she passed away, also his son passed away as well. And he was going through these difficulties that he was going through. He felt comforted by the fact that he had a lot of people that came to his son's funeral, because he realized that they're not coming for actually his son, but they're actually coming because of the Torah. And why did he feel good? Because through his son's passing, it helped in making a big Kiddush Hashem. So. And I also have to apologize because there was I've got a few emails regarding last week's class. There was some sort of issue on the audio, so I apologize. It was only about 2 minutes. There was not that much that you missed. I think the part that was missed in the last week's class in the audio problem was in the transfer between the emperors. So we'll go very quickly over it because I don't think, from my understanding, I listened to it over and I don't think it was any major issues, major parts in there, but. In any case, so the emperors throughout this series was Domitian. Then after Domitian came Nerva. After Nerva came Trajan. After Trajan came Hadrian. The time period that we are right now is Hadrian, right? And we spoke about it, the assassination. We think we spoke about that last class as well. That's where Trajan got assassinated. So right now we are in the time period where Rabbi Akiva, he lost his wife, he lost his child. There is a new emperor in town, and that emperor is Hadrian. So. Hadrian, was told about the Jews. The Jews are so smart. The Jews are so great. The Jews are so full of wisdom. So he says, "Listen, let me meet one of them." So he met with Rabbi Yeshua, and he goes to Rabbi Yeshua and he says, "What science do you specialize? Where is your wisdom? Which particular area of focus is your wisdom?" So Rabbi Yeshua answered, "So listen, it says the Torah deals with everything, and it literally does deal with everything. If you actually go into the depths of Torah, you learn everything from mathematics to physics to literally it encompasses everything." So he said, okay. So he started asking him questions, very, very particularly, questions in a very interesting manner. He says Hadrian. He goes to Rabbi Yeshua and he says, "How long does it take a hen to hatch her egg?" So Rabbi Yeshua answered him, 21 days. The time it takes to blossom of a hazel tree to ripen. So then he says, "How long is the gestation of a dog?" He says 50 days, the time it takes for a fig to ripen. And he says a cat, 52 days. And he compares them all to also fruits or vegetables or anything like that. A pig, 60 days, like an apple. A fox, 6 months, like a grain. And he goes on, and one after another, he's like shooting him off. Maybe it was the science that he read that day, and that's why he was particular about that. But he kept on asking same things about gestation of different animals. Or Rabbi Yeshua came one after another, until he came to the snake. And they came to the snake, and also Rabbi Yeshua said something, and the Hadrian was like, "Aha, our science is different than that. We say until now, apparently it was all correct. And when he came to the snake, all of a sudden it was all different." So Rabbi Yeshua says, "What can I tell you?" He says, "The Torah is true, it's legitimate, everything is 100% true." He says, "Your science must be wrong." So I see you feel pretty confident about your Torah over here. So he says, "If you're so confident in your Torah, I want you to go and debate against the wise scholars from my residence." And it's not like we're like I respectfully decline. I would love to. I've been so backed up with stuff back in my place. Hadrian was like, "You're going to come. You're going to debate, and if you fail and if you lose the debate, you are going to die." Right? It's high stakes. So. He goes and they start debating. Now, the way that they debated over there, they were very twisted. I guess the scholars back then, they would ask questions and they would sort of try to direct the person to answer a certain way, and then based on that answer, come from a totally different angle and say, "Aha, you see, based on your answer over there," and they try to work on that way. So. They go over to Rabbi Yeshua and they say, if a man asks a woman to marry him and she refuses, would it make sense for him to try his luck with a woman of a higher social standing or not? So Rabbi Yeshua, they asked a question out of the blue. Rabbi Yeshua took a nail and he went over to the bottom of the wall, tried to put it in, didn't work. And then he went to a higher part where it was, supposed to fit, and he went right in. And he said to them, And he said, actually, he didn't say anything. That's how he answered them. So they replied back to him, and they said, who did God first give the Torah? God didn't first give the Torah to the Jews. It says that God goes over to every single nation, and every single nation goes and refuses the Torah. And all of a sudden, finally, okay, God's out of options. To be like, okay, there's some slave subjugated nation that hey, you guys want to accept the Torah? We'll be like, yep, we'll take them. So what does that show? That shows that we're the bottom of the tadpole. We're the end. We're like the lowest rungs. So Rabbi Yeshua, this is how he answered them. He says, no, just the opposite. He says that nail, it was on the lower part. It didn't fit in because that wasn't its place for it. It fit in where it went to its place to it. If a woman wants to go and get married to somebody, if she found somebody in the lower standing, it doesn't mean that she can't go to a higher standing. She just didn't find the one that was meant for her. So too, the Jewish people, it wasn't that we are in a lower standing than anybody else. Rather, that we were always meant to be together. But, it was, it had to be put in the right place. And they kept on asking questions after questions, like, very deceiving questions. And Rabbi Yeshua answered all of them. Finally, they actually declared themselves defeated. They said, listen, he got us. We can't answer anything. Hadrian was so impressed by that he decided that he's going to go and convert to Judaism. He's going to go. And it was like, we're going to rebuild a temple. Everything's going to be awesome. We're going to, everything is going to be great. And the Jews were actually comparing him to Darius II. Darius II who built the second Bet HaMikdash. However, this didn't last. Hadrian was a very flip-flopper. And just as quick as he had this enthusiasm for Judaism, he went like 180 degrees completely against Judaism. Not only completely against Judaism, he started, making very, very serious decrees against Judaism. And he went and he placed a governor in Judea by the name of Tinius Rufus. This is, if you look it up in the secular sources, it's pronounced Tinius Rufus. In the Jewish sources, it's pronounced Turnus Rufus. So we're going to use a Jewish source as Turnus Rufus. So he is placed as the governor of Judea. Now he goes and he starts putting very, very bad decrees. Obviously, the Jewish people were in a great despair. You know how it is when you're going, you hit the peak. All of a sudden, you see the light at the end of the tunnel, and then all of a sudden it gets really dark again. So the Jews were obviously very, very down, and had all their hopes and dreams shattered. So Rabbi Yeshua actually went and he comforted them. He says, listen, imagine what would have happened if Hadrian would have converted. He says, you think he would have kept to all the laws of Judaism? No, he's going to start making all his excuses and all things that is allowed, and this is allowed, and this is allowed. At the end, he's going to abolish Judaism. Who knows how many people he's going to take along with it? So he says, in fact, this was better that it happened this way. A short while later, Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya, which was one of Rabbi Akiva's teachers, passed away. And Turnus Rufus, besides going all these crazy decrees, he also had people force them to worship a statue of the emperor. And if you didn't, you were punished by death. And there were two great sages that got punished with death: Rabbi Shimon ben Esanal and Rabbi Ishmael. And obviously, it was a very tragic time for the Jewish nation. But Rabbi Akiva goes when he eulogized them. He says, you should not, where our cry should not be for the lost sages. He says there must be something bad that's coming up. Because God took them away, that there's not going to witness something bad that's going to happen. And, which was true, and which we'll soon see what happened. There was, a next part, which is I had a very, very hard time to figuring out where it goes chronologically. So I'll give you both ideas. And this is the part where Rabbi Akiva's students passed away. So we know Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students. Even the biggest yeshiva today, which we know we have Torah flourishing that we never had Torah before, Baruch Hashem and Shekein Yirbu. But you had one teacher had 24,000 students back in that day. That was a tremendous amount. And every single one of them died. Every single one of them died from Pesach to Shavuot. They all died. And this is one of the reasons why we are in a mourning for the first 32 days. Which is also, why did they die? Because Lo nahagu kavod zeh lezeh, the Gemara says. They didn't respect each other, didn't honor each other one to another. The obvious question is, how is that possible? How? You're talking about, not like, it's not like a student that, some guy comes, once in a while to a class and be like, yeah, he's my student, he's my student, he's my student. I mean, come on. These are people that were giants in the Torah. They were giants. So how is it that they were able to fall apart in one, very seemingly obvious mitzvah that you have to honor your friend? So granted, this is not the time, don't we have the scope of the time allotted to us to be able to go and delve into this, but I'll give you just a short reason and just to have a little bit of understanding. That actually my father showed it to me from the Ben Yehuda. He says the Gemara, when it speaks about it, doesn't say 24,000 students, it says 12,000 pairs, which means the chavutas, they were matched up. And Rabbi Akiva saw that they weren't honoring up to par. So what he did was he took someone really strong, at like a high level, and he took someone really weak and he parted them up together, sort of to like, okay, now get your balance, so you'll be able to honor each other. But what happened was they switched it around. They took it, so the strong guy said, listen, look at me, I'm like the rabbi, I have to teach this guy. And so he didn't honor the guy. Then the other guy, the weaker guy says, listen, I'm learning with the stronger guy. Look at the level that I am. We're chavutas together. So at the end, they didn't, unfortunately, instead of getting greater honor, it went and backfired and it continued in the way that it was going. But the simple answer is that on their level, when the greater that you are, the more that God is medakdek, is very particular in everything wrong that you do. So on their level, they did something that they shouldn't have done, and that was they did not give the appropriate honor, and that's why they all died. And that's why kavod, if the numerical value for kavod is 32, they died for the first 32 days, which actually wasn't the first 32 days. They died through the period of from Pesach to Shavuot, but they died for 32 days. On the days that we say Tachnun, they died. The way we don't say Tachnun, which is 17 of those days, they did not die. Okay, but in any case, the part that I wanted to discuss was, where does this fit in? Where in the chronological lifespan of Rabbi Akiva did these 24,000 people die? So I saw two conflicting ideas, and I'm going to present both of them to you. One of them was that it was, they died on earlier in his life, not in the time period that we are right now. But however, I did see another idea that being that we're going to soon see the Rabbi Akiva supported the Bar Kochba, which we're going to soon, explain it was the Mashiach, or what everybody thought it was a Mashiach in that point in time. And he had an army. And there's one opinion that says that they died in the army because he supported them. They all fought in the army and they died. How did they die? The Gemara says askara. They died in askara. Is I think the translation that I saw was croup. Was a very, very painful death of suffocation, of like choking, something with the airways. So they died in that manner. Then the question is asked, well, if they died with a choking manner, if that's what the Gemara says, then how could they die at war? How could they die? So I saw another answer to that is that the reason why they died is they were actually fighting a war, and they got they were pushed back to the desert, and in the desert is where they'd suffered the death of Askara. Now again, this is all back and forth and what's going on, but the opinion that we're going on now is that they actually died in this time period that we are now. But again, it's possible that they died as well before. So 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died. Now we just take a moment over here. What could that do to a teacher? You know what's the average per day? If you have 24,000, the average is like 750 people of his students dying a day. That means like every few minutes, someone will come over to Rabbi Akiva and be like, one of your students died. Be like, what happened? And they say, this is the name. I'd be like, wow. And a few minutes later, another one, and another one. Could destroy a person. In fact, after that like short period of time that they all died, a normal person will be like, God, I get the point. I obviously got to stop teaching, Torah because it's not working out. Like 100% mortality rate is not a good rate, that you could, show people. So like, how many students you had? I had 24,000. Well, what happened to them? He says, they died. He says, how many? All of them. All 24,000. Everyone be like, all right, all right, we're going to go to the next shiur Torah, all right, don't have such a good, But Rabbi Akiva didn't give up. Not only did Rabbi Akiva not give up, he went and then he found 5 more students. It's also a thing that those 5 students went and they agreed to learn. I can imagine, be like 100%. And those 5 students that we had, that he taught, is the reason why we have the oral law that we have today. The time that Rabbi Akiva lived was a time of great prosecution against the Jewish people, against the Talmidei Chachamim, and things were falling apart. We weren't allowed to give smicha. It was a terrible time for the Jewish people. And because of Rabbi Akiva, because of Rabbi Akiva's perseverance, because of his ability to go and continue teaching Torah, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai came from him. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai went and we have the Kabbalah, we have the Zohar because of him. You have Rabbi Meir. We have the halacha from the Mishnah because of him. And in fact, you have the Sifra, the Sifri, the Seder Olam Zutra. You have so much of the Torah that we have today is only because Rabbi Akiva that he went and he continued after that. He did not give up and he went on. This is just a lesson. Right now, I would pause for a second. It's a lesson that we have to learn. So no matter how much you fall and how much you suffer and how much you go, you have to keep on going. You have to keep on fighting. You can keep because look at the greatness. And that's what Rabbi Akiva you say in Pirkei Avos. It says if you taught students when you're younger, don't stop teaching until teach when you're older, because you don't know which ones are going to make it. And that is the same idea. We don't know what's going to do. What's that one thing that we're going to do that's going to push it over the edge, and that's what's going to... You look at people in business also. You look at people in the business world, the things that they made money with was not always the things that they thought they would make money with. They tried this, and then something came up, and they happened to do it, and then bam, that's where they made it. So, The same thing with spirituality. You have to try constantly. No matter what it is, what the situation is, you keep on fighting, you keep on pushing. Okay, anyways, moving along with the story. So Rabbi Akiva now has to deal with, he has 24,000 widows and countless more orphans. So Rabbi Akiva didn't like step back and be like, listen, all right, I'm sorry, but to each your own, and I got to continue, whatever it is. He went and he cared for each of the 24,000 orphans. Now that is a tremendous expense. How did he get that money? So he went over. There was a Roman noblewoman that after her husband died, she came to Israel and she had a beachfront property. She built a beautiful palace. She was very extremely wealthy. That he would always go and ask money for her, for donations and things like that. I don't think she was Jewish. It sounded like she was still not. But she was very interested in Judaism, and so she wanted to live in Israel. So he goes over to her and he says to her, my dear noblewoman, he explains the whole situation, 24,000 suicides. She's like, that's terrible. He says, yeah, I need 100,000 gold coins, which is a tremendous amount of money back then. And she says, of course, I'll donate to your cause, absolutely. And Rabbi Akiva says, not so fast. He says, I'm not coming here for a donation. She says, what are you coming here for? He says, I'm coming here for a loan. I want you to loan me the money, and in 1 year's time, I'm going to come back and pay it. So the noblewoman, steps back for a second. She says, listen, she says, Rabbi Akiva, says 100,000 gold coins, that's a tremendous sum. That could even impoverish me. He says, what guarantor are you going to give me? So Rabbi Akiva says, I'll give you all my possessions that I have. I'll put it as a guarantor, and I'll get you 10 other wealthy men. And she says, no. She says, that's not going to be it. I don't feel comfortable with that. So Rabbi Akiva says, fine. What do you want? What do you want as a guarantor? So she says, I want you to place God and the sea. She lived by the sea. I want God and the sea to be the guarantor. She says, fine. As it be, as you said. And she goes and they sign the contract that the God and the sea, not the God of the sea, the God and the sea, the two are going to be the guarantors for the money. So Rabbi Akiva takes this money and he goes and he supports. He actually lent some people money so they could start some business or whatever it is, and he actually supported the orphans and the widows and everybody that needed money. Because of that, he went and supported them. He goes and throughout the year he went and he started collecting from all the wealthy people. A year goes by and he gets the money. He gets the full amount, the 100,000 gold coins. And the time comes that he has to go and travel to return the money to this woman. And unfortunately, he fell really sick. He fell bedridden sick. He lost consciousness at one point. So he was very, very sick, and he couldn't go and he couldn't travel. Meanwhile, the day is up, and she's waiting for her. This is her fortune, and the sun is starting to set, and she's getting crazy. She starts pacing back and forth on the beach, and on her front on her backyard over there. And she's like, what's going on over here? It's almost and she's going out of her mind. And finally, she sees the day is almost over. Rabbi Akiva's not here. So she looks up to God and she says, listen, God, says, I gave it to your children so that they could do. He says, you're the guarantor, the God in the sea, pay me back. As she's saying this, she sees a chest floating in the ocean. This nice, big, beautiful chest. And she's watching this chest, and this chest, the waves slowly bring the chest to the, to her property. And when she sees this chest, she couldn't even lift it up, it was so heavy. She calls her servant and says, bring this chest inside. They come, they run it, and they said, open the chest. And the chest was locked, it was very hard for them, but after a long period of time, they were able to open it. And lo and behold, guess what's inside? Tons and tons of gold coins, gold diners. So now she's like, she's starting to, sweat a little bit. She's like, count it up. And guess how much it was inside there? 100,000 gold coins. Came up in there and did that. Now, a short while after that, Rabbi Akiva goes and he gets better and he comes back. And he says, I'm sorry, I got held up. I couldn't, I was ill. I have the money for you. She says, no. He says, what do you mean? He says, we mentioned this is a loan. I'll pay you back. He says, your guarantors took care of it. He's like, what do you mean? And she explains the whole situation. He says, and she refused to take it. So this is also another source of where Rabbi Akiva got the wealth that he was able to distribute also more for the poor. But now the question is, where did this chest come from? How did 100,000 gold coins just float up out of nowhere? So there was the emperor, which was Hadrian, didn't have the greatest relationship with his wife, and he didn't have either any children. So what he did, the way that they used to do it is that if they didn't have any children, they would sort of like adopt somebody who they want to be the next emperor, and because of their separate sort of relationship, he wanted to adopt one person, she wanted to adopt another person. And the one that Hadrian wanted to adopt, he wasn't the ambitious type. He was very lazy, and the other one was very, very ambitious. He wanted to become emperor, the one that she wanted to adopt. So they were constantly, going back and forth. And then, the wife, I think her name was Sabina, she goes over to, her guy, which his name was Varus. The other, Hadrian's guy's name is Antonius. And she goes to Varus and he says, listen, you got to do something about, Hadrian's guy because, he's really pushing for it. So Varus goes and he says, fine. He says, I have something in mind. And he goes and they start chatting, these two young guys. And he starts convincing him. He says, you know what a headache it is to be an emperor? He's like, oh, I can't even imagine. He says, nonstop, you have the headaches and all, So, Varus says, is this really that hard? Because he knew he wasn't ambitious. He says, yeah, it's terrible. You don't want it. He says, what am I supposed to do? Hadrian wants it to appoint me. I was like, I'll tell you a secret. Hadrian wants to appoint me, as if he didn't know. And he says, you know what? I'm going to go and convince Hadrian that I'm going to refuse the position. So Varus starts laughing. He says, are you kidding me? He says, Hadrian is the emperor. Have you seen ever in his entire life somebody able to convince him something? Not going to happen. So he says, what am I supposed to do? So he says, listen, you have the opportunity to do something that even the gods, back then they used to believe in a bunch of gods, even the gods don't have the opportunity to do. So he says, what do I have? What's the options do I have? And it says, you're able to take your life. If you take your life, then you won't have all these troubles, all these problems of being emperor. So he says, that's a good idea. And Hadrian was so careful with his guy that he always had a bodyguard with him. And they're walking, so he leaves, they part their ways, and they're walking the bodyguard. They're walking on the boardwalk over there, and he sees a boat. Antonio sees a boat. He jumps in the boat. He sees this is a chance, and he starts rowing away as fast as he can. The bodyguard sees him. He starts screaming. He says, "Where are you going?" And he starts screaming back, "Don't worry about it. Don't follow me. Leave me alone." And of course, the bodyguard jumps in the next one and starts rowing right after him. And there, he's speeding away, and he's going with all his might, and he's actually, gaining a lot of ground over the bodyguard. Eventually, he gets into the middle of the ocean, the river, wherever they want, and he jumps himself in, and he drowns himself. And he was actually successful in drowning himself. And so what happened is that they brought the body back to. It actually took them a while to find the body. They told Hadrian about the situation, and Hadrian went berserk. He went crazy. At the particular time that he actually moved into an area near Egypt, or actually might have been Egypt, that the Egyptian place, they came over and they gave him a nice big donation, a chest full of gold coins, as sort of a welcoming gift. Good. That's the way they used to get on the. Now they call them bribes. Back then it was a gift, but think of it as the same idea. So. He's mourning for his child, whatever it was, his adopted son, and he's going, thank you, and he's going crazy, and they give him this gift all of a sudden. So in his rage, throughout his mind, thank you very much, he goes and he takes he had his property was also on the boardwalk. He takes the chest and he throws it into the ocean, and he starts ripping out his hair, mourning the way they used to mourn. This is the same chest that went and traveled all the way to the woman that gave the donation to Rabbi Akiva. So Hadrian, he goes and very, very upset of the Jews, and as well as placing Turnus Rufus as the one who is in charge, he goes over. And Turnus Rufus decides that there are things that you're not allowed to do in Judaism anymore. And they are no more Brit Milah, no more circumcision, not allowed to. Also, not allowed to keep Shabbat. And finally, they force you to serve idol worship. So, during the time when Hadrian, the reason why he was in Egypt as opposed to the place that he was before, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was in Egypt, is that he didn't like his previous palace, so he sort of moved this palace. So when he went to this new palace, Rabbi Akiva decided to go and to plead. He says, listen, the governor, Turnus Rufus, is causing us many problems. He wanted to go and plead for the Jewish cause. And at the same point in time, Turnus Rufus also came to the emperor, just whatever, as part of, I don't know if it was a delegation, or he was there at the time. So Rabbi Akiva goes over and says, look, he's not letting us, no Shabbat, no circumcision, forcing us to serve idols. He's choking us. So the emperor Hadrian goes over to Turnus Rufus and he says, can you what do you say to these allegations? So he says, I have a response to all of them. So Turnus Rufus, now there's like a debate going between Rabbi Akiva and Turnus Rufus in front of Hadrian. So Turnus Rufus goes over to Rabbi Akiva, and he says, what are more beautiful, the works of God or the works of human beings? So again, they all had the same mentality of switching, trying to get that person in the hole. And Rabbi Akiva answers, the works of human beings. So Turnus Rufus says, oh, are you serious? He says, come, look outside. He says, can human beings create the heavens and the earth? So Rabbi Akiva says, what are you talking about, things that are out of our control? You told me what are greater, the works of man or the works of God. You got to give us something that's in the realm of both. And Rabbi Akiva comes out, and he comes back a short while later with two things, and one thing in each hand. One was kernels of wheat, and the other one was this master, loaf, baked by this, the best baker. And he says, which one do you want to eat? He says, you want to chew on the kernels or you want to eat this loaf? He He says, this was created by God, this was created by human. Now you tell me which is greater. So he goes, Turnus Rufus goes and he says, why do you guys circumcise yourself? God made you uncircumcised. Why are you changing it? And Rabbi Akiva says, I knew that you were leading towards that, and that's why I answered you the way I answered you. He says, because God gave this world in a way that is not complete. It's not finished. Loaves of bread don't grow. We have to, there are certain things that we have to do to the world to perfect it. And one of the things that we have to do is as a job, is to take a physical world and move it to a spiritual world. And that's what we do when we're circumcising ourselves. We're sort of partnering up with creation and we're completing it, with the creation. Hadrian was very, happy with the response, and he says, well put. He says, circumcision is back on the table. You're allowed to do it. So Turnus Rufus goes and he goes to the next one, and he says, Shabbat. You guys celebrate Shabbat. He says, what makes you honor Shabbat over any other day of the week? Honor any other random day. So Rabbi Akiva goes over back to him and he says, why are you the governor of Judea? He says, let the Hadrian go give anybody else the job. So Turnus Rufus goes and he says, you want to honor me. He says, Rabbi Akiva says so too. God wanted to honor the Sabbath. And he says, in fact, we know that when the Jews were in the desert, they ate man. When did the man fall? 6 days a week. It did not fall on Shabbat, because on Shabbat, that's when everything rested. So, Turnus Rufus goes and says, yeah, sure, thanks. Give me some proof that happened hundreds and who knows how long ago. He says, give me something that happened today. He says, if you look what's going on today, he says, it rains on Shabbat? Yes. The wind blows on Shabbat? Yes. There's no difference. You're telling me back then it used to be a difference. Right now there's no difference. Why honor Shabbat? Go pick Sunday. Go pick a Tuesday. So Rabbi Akiva says, and he says, all right. He says, you want something today? He says, in India, there's a river called the Simbatyon River. The Simbatyon River is a river that 6 days a week, the rocks and the dirt, everything jumps. It jumps up and down. And the water jumps around. Shabbat, it's all rested. So go and check. So, Turnus Rufus goes and says, yeah, thank you very much. Who's going to go travel to India now to go check your thing? Very smart of you. Go check something that's across the world. He says, give me something from around here. So Rabbi Akiva says, fine, you want something from around here? He says, your father is buried in this area. Go to your father's gravesite, and you'll see, because of all his sins that he committed in his life, he's suffering, retribution in the next world. For 6 days of week, you'll see smoke coming out of his grave, because he's suffering in Gehenna. He's suffering in hell. The seventh day, which is Shabbat, it rests, and you're not going to see it. Any smoke come up. And so it was. And Hadrian again goes and he says, Shabbat, back on the table. Finally, he goes and he says on serving idols. And he goes and he says, why does God hate us? It says, he asks him, Turnus Rufus asks Rabbi Akiva, why does God hate us? He quotes from Malachi. It says that, that God hates Esav in Malachi, chapter 1, verse 3. So Rabbi Akiva replies and he says, listen, this is great. He says, I had a dream. And I had 2 dogs. One was, the name was Rufus, and that was a male, and the female was named Rufina. And Turnus Rufus starts getting beet red, and he says, how dare you name dogs after me and my wife? His name was Rufus, his wife's name was Rufina. And he turns beet red and he starts getting really angry. He says, you should be... And meanwhile, Hadrian finds this very comical. He's laughing, he's enjoying himself. He's dreaming about the governor and his wife and being dogs. So and Rabbi Akiva says, hey, what's the problem? Why are you getting so upset at me? He says, you eat, the dog eats. You go to the bathroom, the dog goes to the bathroom. You sleep, what is different between you and the dog? Absolutely nothing. You're exactly the same as the dog. So he goes and he says, furthermore, he says, but look, you're getting upset that I'm calling you in the same of a dog, and you guys are very similar. He says, how do you think God feels when he has people that he created the heaven and the earth, and he created everybody, and then they go and they make a god out of wood and a god out of stone, and they go and they worship this god? He says, don't you think God is going to be angry? Don't you think that's why God hates the people that serve Avodah Zarah? And he says, and that's why we hate people. We don't serve Avodah Zarah. We don't follow in your ways. We stay away from that. So Hadrian goes and he says, you're acquitted from that as well. Rabbi Akiva leaves, everything is good, Baruch Hashem, but Turnus Rufus goes home defeated, depressed, dejected, and he goes and he says, his wife sees him, his wife Rufina sees him, and he says, my dear, Hadrian, he says, what's going on? He says, you look, downtrodden, depressed, well, what happened? And he says, this is Rabbi Akiva, this guy constantly brings me down, he constantly shames me in front of the emperor. So he says, let me take care of him. And he says, he's like, you're going to take care of him? He's like, how are you going to take care of him? He says, don't worry about it. Let me take care of him. She was a very attractive woman. And she goes and she dresses very, very, fancy clothes. And she goes to visit Rabbi Akiva with the idea of seducing him. And Rabbi Akiva sees her, and he does three things, the Gemara says. He spits, he laughs, and then he cries. So then she stares at him, at this, majestic, Talmid Chacham, and she says, "Why'd you do that?" So he says, "I spat because, I realized, where you come from, your origins. And furthermore," he says, "your physical beauty is not something that I deem beautiful." And we know there's a different, in Avot Rabbi Natan, there was a certain person that wanted to also seduce Rabbi Akiva. And he sent him two women of the night. And, Rabbi Akiva, all night they tried to seduce him, and he refused. The next day they went over back to the person that sent them and says, "Don't you ever embarrass us again. We've never been this humiliated in our entire life." So he goes over to him. He says, "How are you?" The person that sent them, he says, "How are you able to withstand the temptation?" So Rabbi Akiva says, "What am I supposed to do?" He says, "They eat non-kosher food, and the odor of non-kosher food, disgusts me." He says, "I found it, vulgar. It was like, I couldn't even deal with it." So Rabbi Akiva goes to her and he says, "Listen," he says, your beauty is not what I deem beautiful. That's why I spat. And also I saw your origin. I laughed. I cannot tell you why." And he cried like literally, tears coming down in his face. And he says, first of all, what cried is what you end up in. You're going to end up, being eaten by worms. A woman is such a great, pretty compared to the world standards. You're going to end up eaten just like everybody else. And he says, but even furthermore, he says that your soul is going to go into the depths of Gehenna. He says, what have you accomplished in your life? He says, you have done nothing that you could contribute to the purpose of creation. He literally did zero, nothing. He says, what's going to be with your soul? Your soul is going to end up, he said this with sincerity, and it's really, if we stop and think about it, there's so many people in this world, unfortunately, that what have they contributed to the purpose of creation? The purpose of creation is not to go and run after money. The purpose of creation is not to go and run after the desire. The purpose of creation is to get closer to God. The purpose of creation is a Torah. We see that there's ways to grow yourself, to fix yourself. And says, and what have people accomplished for that? How many can we say that actually went to the purpose of creation? So she was very taken aback by this sincerity and by his the ability to speak, and it really shook her up. And she says, "Dear Rabbi," she says, "what can I do?" So she began to cry also. And she says, "Is it still possible for me to change?" And then she goes and says, "Rabbi, can I convert?" She says, "May I convert?" And he says, "You can and you may." And they leave it at that. She actually goes and she actually divorced because she decided that she wants to convert to Judaism. She brought this idea to her husband, which obviously was very against it, and she divorced him. She took a lot of the wealth as well, and she went and she converted to Judaism. I don't know exactly how long after conversion, she actually went and married Rabbi Akiva. And that's why he laughed. Said the Gemara, you know why he laughed? Because he saw in Ruach HaKodesh that I'm going to end up marrying you. Says that he realized, because remember his wife Rachel passed away, and he saw in Ruach HaKodesh that he's going to end up marrying her. But obviously he couldn't tell her that, and that's why he left. Okay, so during this time, like we said, the situation with between the Romans and the Jews were very, very in not good terms, and in fact the Turnus Rufus actually went and he put an avodah zarah. I believe there was a temple of Jupiter on the Kodesh HaKodashim. And the place where the temple was, he put Avodah Zarah. So needless to say, the Jews, it was a rebellion in the brewing. There was something going on over there. And during this time, there was words some guys started getting very popular. His name was Shimon ben Koziba. And people started saying that this is the guy, he's Mashiach. Very, very strong guy, very charismatic guy, goes in the way of Torah. He literally had character traits of the Mashiach. Born like everything. So people, the rabbis started going and seeing is this really the Mashiach? And his uncle was Rabbi Lezer Hamudai, which was able to confirm his lineage, that he was in the correct lineage. And Rabbi, there was some sages that said he's not the Mashiach. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma was one of them. Rabbi Yochanan ben Torsa also was one of them, and he said this was not the Mashiach. But Rabbi Akiva, which was the leader of generation, he said he is the Mashiach. And he said about him, he went and investigated, and he said this is the Mashiach. And he said about him a pasuk in Bamidbar, in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, Darach Kochba mi Yaakov v'kam shevet mi Yisrael, which is a translation, a star has come forth from Yaakov, a scepter from Yisrael, which means there's a star. And that's why he started being called, instead of Shem Bar Koziba, he started calling Bar Kochba. Bar Kochba is like the star. He started calling the star. And needless to say, when you have Rabbi Akiva, the leader of the generation, endorsing you as the Mashiach, So people from all over the world, the Jews started coming in, and they started joining the Mashiach's army. There was a rebellion coming off, and this Bar Kochba, he was, he was very particular. He only took warriors into his army. He was, who did he pick? The first what he did was, you want to join my army, you got to cut off your small finger. And Chachamim started, says, come on, you can't deform the human body. He says, you're not allowed to do that. And so he says, fine. Says instead of that, he says, while you're riding, you're going to have to be able to uproot a small tree, which is a tremendous, the feat of it and the strength that you have to. And he got, the numbers, the sheer numbers that he has, which we have anywhere between 100 to 200,000 warriors in this strength. Nowadays, back then, remember, the population was much smaller than we have it now. So it was a tremendous amount, and it was actually a very great threat to the actual Roman Empire. So as Rabbi Akiva endorsed Bar Kochba, and Bar Kochba's army grew, they started fighting. They started making a rebellion and started fighting against the Roman occupation in the land, and they were like they are undefeated. The Jews started like it was a joke already. It was like taking over the entire Israel, and every time the Hadrian would send in one of his top generals. In fact, one of the generals that he sent in, Bar Kochba actually killed him with his own bare hands. It was, he couldn't, they couldn't, control the rebellion. And Hadrian found this as a threat to his empire because, remember, the Roman Empire spread out through the entire world. So they had a lot of subjugated lands. Now, if they hear that Israel's rebelling, because if it would be like, okay, Israel, small country, all right, fine, let them do what they do. Why bother with it? We have plenty of money, plenty of other resources that we need to deal with. But the threat was that if they're rebelling, then every other country is going to be like, well, if they could do it, then we can do it. So he's going to have a full-fledged rebellion from all the lands. So he felt it as a threat to his entire kingdom, and he went and he put so much sources. In fact, we'll soon see that he actually brought in the majority of his troops, of his infantry, of his all his warriors, of his army, went to Israel to fight against Bar Kochba. So obviously the Jews started believing in Bar Kochba now because he's going undefeated. Rabbi Akiva, it sounded really good. And shortly afterwards, Bar Kochba went, and so Jerusalem was surrounded by a wall, and I believe he needed 1,000 men. They all scaled the wall, went in, and took over the city. They took over the entire Jerusalem. And once the Jews started hearing about this, now everybody started flocking in. This is because he started actually building the Bet HaMikdash. They actually started rebuilding. The Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, not that long ago. So they actually started rebuilding the Bet HaMikdash again. And when they started they were starting rebuilding. So Kohanim was starting to practice. They were starting to learn the laws of Korban. The Levim were practicing singing. And people started coming in. They destroyed the temple over there, and they brought it down. Now, people that they always want to be on the winning team. I like to call them in New York. We call them the Yankees. Back in that day, in my day, not that I cared back then because I feel it's foolish and it's a waste of time, following sports. But the Yankees won consistently, and the Mets, Rahman al-Litzan, Hashem should help them. But weren't so successful. So I don't know. Maybe switch around. I'm not sure. But why do people like the Yankees? Because they're winners. People like to be on the winning side. So there was a group of Samaritans and Kutim. The way that it happened was back in the destruction of Israel, the king of Assyria. He went and we know this famous thing that he took the 10 tribes and he subjugated them to different lands. So what he did was, in order to get a subjugation, he took Israel and he took the 10 tribes, sent them to our faraway lands, and he took the people from the other lands and he brought them in here. This way, it's very hard to form a rebellion. People are not used to so it keeps it under control. The problem is that these people, the Samaritans, they obviously didn't follow the Torah. And God, they were in Israel. They didn't follow the Torah. God sent them lions against them. And they told the king of Assyria, says, listen, people are getting torn apart. They don't follow the laws of the land. So the king of Assyria went and he brought priests. He brought Chachamim, sages, to go and teach his people the way of the land. So they started, honoring God, but they didn't, leave their avodah zarah, their idolatry. So these people were always on, wasn't on good terms with the Jews. And in fact, when the temple was going to be rebuilt, the second temple, so it started off with, there was Zerubbabel and Yoshua Kohen Gadol. So when they started laying the foundation of the temple, these Samaritans came and says, listen, we want to contribute, we want to help you, we want to make sort of an alliance. And these two tzaddikim, they said, no. He says, we don't need you. He says, we don't need this part of the thing. We have God on our side. We're not interested. Thank you, but no thank you. And they turned them down. And now, obviously, the Kutim were very, very upset about that. And they did not have a very good relationship. And we spoke about it actually in Hanukkah, how the Kutim tried to badmouth, and the Samaritans tried to badmouth us to Alexander the Great. And that worked out because of the Shimon HaTzadik. But we see that it's been like 500 years where there was constant problems with the Kutim, the Samaritans, and the Jewish people. Now that the Samaritans, they see that the Jews are winning, they claim there's a Mashiach, and they're beating every single war, they're like, listen, this is the winning side. They say, let's make an alliance. So they send it to Bar Kochba and says, we want to make an alliance. And Bar Kochba goes and he calls a delegation over of all the Chachamim, all the sages, and he says, listen, we have this opportunity of the Samaritans, the Kutim, they want to join an alliance with us, and I think we should accept them. Rabbi Akiva was present over there, and he says, why should we accept them? And so, Bar Kochba says, so listen, he says, well, we need another enemy. He says, I hear that the Romans are sending they're taking the top general and they're bringing everybody in right now against us. We need all the help that we can get. So Rabbi Akiva says, oh no. He says, hold on a second. He says, in the time of the second Beit HaMikdash, the sages went over there and they refused them. I say the same thing. We don't need them. We got God on our side. He says, what do we need these people? The idolaters are they're gonna infiltrate the land. Who knows what harm they'll do to our people spiritually. So Bar Kochba says, no, we need them. We need them to defeat the Roman general. He says, we need them. He says, we have God on our side, Rabbi Akiva says. And Rabbi Akiva was obviously very against it. Bar Kochba, Shimon ben Kochba was obviously very for it. So he saw that it wasn't getting anywhere. He says, you know what, we'll leave it for tonight. We'll continue discussing it tomorrow. So in the middle of that night, Rabbi Akiva goes and approaches him. And in fact, Bar Kochba, he was so devoted that he answered, the soldiers were over there. He comes in full armor. And he says, Rabbi Akiva, why are you coming to me in the night? Is this, probably such an emergent matter? He says, yeah, it is an emergent matter. And he says, and he brings him up the meeting that they had that day. And he says, listen, this is not good. He says, we have to, we should not accept the Samaritans, the Kudim, because just like they did before, it's not good. We have to have faith and belief in God. And He's going to take care of us. And he says, and Bar Kochba says over there, and he says, listen. He says, I don't rely on miracles. This is what Bar Kochba says. And he says, I have faith in my large and powerful army. He says, as long as God doesn't interfere and doesn't help the enemy, we'll be able to defeat the Romans even without his assistance. So Rabbi Akiva got really, started ripping his clothes for like mourning. And he says, Bar Kochba, he says, you're not the Mashiach after all. He says, you're not the Mashiach. Now I see that you're really not the Mashiach, and I was fooled. He says, with these words of heresy, those words of heretics, he says, so Bar Kochba, Bar Kochba goes over there and he says, you think I don't care about the Jewish nation? He says, look at me, I don't even sleep at night. I still keep myself, I'm always in armor, always ready for battle. Rabbi Akiva replies to him, he says, he says, God doesn't either sleep. He says, you don't have to worry so much, God is going to take care of you. And being that Rabbi Akiva now separated with him, Bar Kochba takes on his sword and so, you're rebelling. You're rebelling against the king. You deserve to die. So Rabbi Akiva says, then kill me. He says, because I'm not standing by you anymore. So Bar Kochba goes and he puts his sword back in. He says, no, I'm not going to kill you. Then I'm going to have to deal with all your friends. And he says, so what are you going to do now? You're going to go and tell everybody? So Rabbi Akiva thinks about it and it says, it's not going to work that I'm going to go and tell everybody I'm going against you. I'm going to separate myself from you. And that's what happened. Rabbi Akiva separated himself from Bar Kochba. Now Rabbi Akiva was out traveling, and so he went to this town, and this town was, during this time the Romans were starting to come in, and so the town they had obviously, like many towns, it had a wall around it, and they knock and they say there was, him and one of his students, and his student says, can we go in? And I don't know, I guess they looked at the people or whatever it was, and it says, no, we don't let anybody in. He says, what do you mean? He says, it's Rabbi Akiva over here and his student. He says, no, we don't let anybody in. We don't know. You guys could be Roman spies, and you're going to come in, you open the gate at night, and we're all going to die. We have a rule, we don't let anybody in. And he said, the great Rabbi Akiva, you're not going to let in? He's right over here. And he says, but the fact that you're telling me that Rabbi Akiva is right outside, I know for sure you're lying. Because we know that Rabbi Akiva is with Bar Kochba. We know that that's where he is. Back then they didn't have newspapers that says, Rabbi Akiva's coming to town, posters everywhere. They didn't know how it looks. Unless you saw him, you knew. Otherwise you didn't know. So Rabbi Akiva says, Kol man da'av rachman al ta'av. What are we supposed to do? So they took their belongings and they went to the nearby forest to find shelter for the night. So they go into the forest, and they had a few items of them. They had a candle, they had a rooster, and they had a donkey. And they're sitting in there. The night falls, so they have the candle lit. They're learning, and all of a sudden it rains, winds and rain, and starts falling, and it takes out the candle. So Rabbi Akiva says, Kol man da'aved Rahman al ta'aved. Everything that God does for the best. Short while later, they hear a roar, and they look and they see a lion kill their donkey, devour the donkey. And again, they say, everything that God does for the best. A short while after that, they see another wild animal goes and kills a rooster as well. And again, Rabbi Akiva says, everything that God does for the best. And the student says, what do you mean everything? We're stranded here with nothing. Akiva says, everything that God does for the best. The next day, they wake up in the early morning, they hear marching, and they hear, they smell smoke, and they get up from I guess they go to a high tree, whatever it is, that they're able to peek on what's going on, and they see that the entire town that they try to get into was up in flames. And they see the whole Roman troops are all around it. During the night, the Roman troops came, and they burst into the town, and they went and they killed everybody. Which what they did to many towns back then. And Rabbi Akiva goes and he says, you see, everything that God does for the best. If we had a light, you didn't think they would see us? Of course they would see us from there. You have a light in nothing. It dispels, a little light dispels a lot of darkness. So, and then he goes and says, if we had a donkey, it would have made noise, would have seen it. And if we had a rooster, what it would have done in the early morning, it would have, and then they would have, because everything happened, that's why we are alive today. And the Roman army started doing this from town to town. There was a few stragglers that were able to go run out, and they ran to Bar Kochba. When Bar Kochba hears about what's going on to the entire place, and he sees a bunch of people that were able to, I guess you call them refugees. They ran from other places, so he decided they needed to do something. Because they hear about the tremendous amount of army, so he goes and he says. I just remembered something that I had to tell you because before. I'm sorry for going out of order. We spoke about. Remember, we said that the 24,000 students died. I didn't tell you who says it. So there's one opinion that I heard that says that they died in the army with Bar Kochba's army, and Reb Herschel Schachter quotes it. It says it in one of his speeches in the name of Reb Heinken, that those 24,000 actually died in the revolt. They were actually soldiers of Bar Kochba. But in any case, going back, Bar Kochba now decides what he's going to do. He has this Roman, so they decided, because now they actually formed an alliance with the Samaritans. They actually didn't listen to Rabbi Akiva. They formed an alliance, and he decided that he is going to. Besides forming an alliance, they need sort of a ground, a place where they could fortify it, and they could go and against the attack of the Roman huge army that's coming. So they decided that one of the Samaritans says, listen, there's a place called Beitar, which has the walls are so impenetrable. We should go over there. That has enough food over there. We'll be able to withstand sieges over there. We should go over there. And Bar Kochba agrees with it, and they call everybody over to Beitar. And they go into Beitar. Obviously, any refugee that comes in, they obviously welcome all the refugees. And so after a while, the Roman Empire goes and is able to conquer almost all of Israel at that point in time, but they couldn't conquer Beitar. So they laid siege to the entire Beitar, and they laid siege for over 2 years. And meanwhile, Bar Kochba was there. They couldn't come in. They held it up really well. And they go and they say, the Samaritans and the Kutim are there as well. The Kutim, in particularly. So the Kutim were, when they signed up for this, they signed up for a quick victory. They signed up for the ability to win them. That's it. Yalla, and we're gonna, fame and honor and money. That's what they signed on. But now it's been 2 years, and they're sitting over there, and they're under a siege. What are you supposed to do? So. One of the servants goes over to the head to the one in charge of the Kutim, and he says, "Listen," he says, "let's surrender to the Romans." He says, "It's not going to happen. We're 2 years over here." So the one in charge of the Kutim says, "Listen," he says, "I agree with you. I would love to surrender, but what are we supposed to do?" Rabbi Elazar Amudai, which is one of the great sages that is in Beitar, he asked, already, it was his uncle, was Bar Kochba. The big rabbi, his uncle was Bar Kochba, and he says, "Enough, let's surrender to the Romans." And Bar Kochba was very upset. He says, "We'll never surrender." He says, "If anybody ever brings up surrender again, they're dead." So he says, "What am I supposed to do? I'm too scared to even bring this up to him." So he goes and he says, and the servant says, "Listen," he says, "I grew up in Beitar. I know this place. There's one particular house that there's a tunnel. There's a secret tunnel that goes from inside the walls, and it goes under, and I could sneak out. I'm able to go through that tunnel, and when I get to the other side, I could speak to the person in charge, and I'll tell them the situation. Maybe they'll cut us a deal with that." So the guy in charge says, "That's an excellent idea. I want you to do it." It just turns out that the Romans at that point in time, they were suffering tremendously. They were dying. They were having diseases. The siege was not going well. 2 years not budging. They told Hadrian, says, "Listen, there's nothing that we can do. We got to leave." So Hadrian says, "I don't believe it." He says, "I want to come down." So Hadrian comes down himself, and he sees the scenario, and he says, "You know what?" He says they were about to give up. They were about to say, like, all right, let's leave it. During this time, when Hadrian was there, that's when this servant of the Kutim comes in. And they bring him in and they say, listen, we caught this guy roaming outside. And he says he's from the outside. He says he wants to speak to the person in charge about surrendering and taking over the town. So they bring him in. And he says, listen, there's a secret passage, I'll show it to you. He says in like a certain amount of time, in a certain days of time, you'll come in, and we'll let you in on the other side. It was a particular house that was actually in possession of the Kutim also, so it worked out very well for them. And he says, but on one condition, and they had obviously the conditions that we have to survive and our people and whatever, a few things. And they agreed to it. They said, of course, they were on the last straws. It says, we got it. It says in the day that we're going to come in, they told them, they set up the day. It says everybody who's in charge with your group, let them wear like a white band tied onto their arm so we know not to kill them and not to hurt them. And they said fine. And he goes and he leaves the campgrounds. He goes back into the tunnel and he comes out. He goes and visits his master, the servant, and the one in charge of all the Kutimimi visits. And he says, listen, this is the idea, we have it, and everything is set up. The master is so happy, he goes and he gives him a purse full of gold coins. Says, this is for you just for now. And there's going to be way more when we get all our honors when the Romans come in. And during this time, he's, some, ignorant guy has where does he go? He goes to the local wine shop. He goes to the local wine shop to celebrate. So he goes and but before he goes to the wine shop, he goes and he stops into the Jewish synagogue. Not that they believed in those stuff; they still served the idols. But he goes and stops in the Jewish synagogue, and he goes in over there, and he sees the entire place is empty. One person is out over there. One person is over there. One person is praying, and that's Rabbi Lezer Amudai. He would always pray constantly, like long hours, constantly praying for the survival of the Jewish state, and that God should have mercy. So this person is looking, this servant, this traitor, goes and looks at him and says, look at this fool, this old man. He's sitting over there. He's so devoted in his prayers. I guarantee if I go into him, he's not even going to hear me. He says, in fact, even if the entire Roman government comes in over here and takes over that, he's so engrossed in his prayers, he's not even going to realize it. And he goes over to him. He says, no one's around. And he looks around, no one's over there. He says, you fool. Rabbi Lezer didn't even budge. He's still concentrating. And he says, your prayers are going to be in vain. He says, you're not going to be able to redeem the city. He says, in a few days' time, or with a certain amount of time, the Romans are going to come in here. They're going to take over everything. And, obviously, Rabbi Lezer was so engrossed in his prayers, he didn't even realize that. He didn't even. And during this time, when he was sort of speaking to Rabbi Lezer, the caretaker came back because he knew that Rabbi Lezer takes a long time to pray, so he wanted to lock up. And he comes back, and who does he see? He sees in the distance these two people talking. What appears to be talking. Really, Lezer is concentrating and praying, and he doesn't realize that. So he realizes they're having a conversation. So he gets up and he leaves. So afterwards he goes and he takes his findings, this servant, and he goes to the wine shop and he starts pounding some wine. And after a nice amount of glasses, he gets very tipsy, very drunk. And people that were in the area, they were talking obviously about politics, and they're saying the Romans, they're dying out. We hear that the time is coming for them, that they're going to soon close off everything and they're going to leave out over here. And meanwhile, this guy, the servant, is listening to it, and he starts piping up all the wine, gives him a lot of courage. And he says, you think that the Romans are going to come in here, they're going to take care of everybody, they're going to and he's like literally like not specifically spilling beans, but he's very much pro the Romans. So the Jews are in there, but look at this, we have a trade over here. Look at the confidence that he's speaking, how the Romans are coming in over here. It says they actually, it was almost going to be a brawl going on. So they stopped and says, let's bring this traitor to Bar Kochba and let him decide what's going to happen. So they bring him to Bar Kochba, and Bar Kochba goes and he starts interrogating him. And he says, listen, and by this time he starts getting sobering up. And Bar Kochba starts, asking me these questions. He's getting really nervous. And he says, no, I didn't mean, obviously very much denying the fact, but he didn't do a good job. So Bar Kochba goes and he says, if you tell me the truth, I'll let you live. So at this point in time, this servant, evil idea had hatched into his head, and he says, fine. He says, you know what? I'll tell you the truth. And he says, Rabbi Lezer Amadai, your uncle, so I met him, and he paid me to kill you because he says we need to go and we need to subjugate, we need to surrender, otherwise all the Jewish people are going to die. And and here to have the proof, here is a purse full of gold coins that he paid me to kill you. So he says, my own uncle, the big guy, he says, it doesn't make any sense. He would kill me. He says, bring in my uncle, call in my uncle. So they call in the Rabbi Lezer Amadai. They come to Rabbi Kochba and he says, what does my king desire? Rabbi Kochba says, so Rabbi Kochba answers him, says, you call me king? He says, you still believe me? He's like, of course. What's it? He says, didn't you hire somebody to kill me? He says, are you kidding me? So why would I ever do that? He says, he says, because you want to surrender. He says, it's true. I do want to surrender. Everybody knows that. He says, but I'll never go again and kill you. Why would I, God forbid. So he calls out the servant, and he says, and he goes over to his uncle, and he says, "Do you know this guy?" The uncle looks at him and says, "I've never saw him before in my life." So he goes over. So the Bar Kochba goes over to the servant and says, "So what do you have to say?" And says, "Listen, I spoke to him today." He says, "You don't believe me? There's a caretaker, saw us conversing. Go call the caretaker of the synagogue." So they call the caretaker over, and Bar Kochba says, "Have you ever seen these two people talking?" And the caretaker said, "Yeah, today I was going to close up the synagogue, and I saw these two were conversing while so I decided to leave them alone." So Bar Kochba got so upset about his uncle Rabbi Elazar Badai that he went and he stood up and he gave him a very powerful kick on his chest, some sort of powerful blow. And Bar Kochba went into obviously Bar Kochba was tremendous strength. Rabbi Elazar was like taking his last breaths, and he says, "What have you done?" Rabbi Elazar says, he says, I'm your most loyal friend, your most loyal person." And then he goes and he says, and his last words, he says, "Dear God, please don't punish him and have compassion on my people." And with that, Rabbi Elazar ben Dai passes away. After Rabbi Elazar ben Dai passed away, people already saw that the presence of God, the Bar Kochba's power, it already started diminishing. And a short while later was the 9th of Av, and the 9th of Av is when they orchestrated that the entire Roman army started piling out from a house within the grounds, and people were like, "What's going on? How are the Romans over here?" So people started screaming, "Treason, treason, treason!" And the entire Bar Kochba army came in, and they saw Romans were piling on, so they started fighting. They fight inside the grounds. The Bar Kochba's army was so strong that they were able actually to subdue the entire area. And now the Kutim were fighting also against the Jews. So you had coming from outside and coming war with inside. With all of that, they were still able to subdue it. They were still able to go and bring the place where people were infiltrating from that secret passage into a lock. But the problem was, since they were away from the walls, the Romans were able to breach one of the walls. And when the Romans were able to breach one of the walls, they started coming in, and that's when it started taking for the worse. Now, this servant that was being put in front of trial by Bar Kochba started screaming to Bar Kochba. He says, "Give up, stop it." He says, "It's useless, surrender to the Romans." And Bar Kochba puts it all together, and he sees there was something fishy. Bar Kochba picks up this huge boulder, and he throws like a bomb straight at the servant, and it hits him square on. And the servant was, a few minutes away from death. And as he's dying, he says, his last words were, he says, "Your uncle was innocent." I guess he had some subconscious bothering him. He says, "Your uncle was innocent," and he says, "and you are his murder." When Bar Kochba heard about this, he dropped his sword. He felt faint. He leaned against the wall, and he couldn't believe it. He says, "This is what how far he went down." And while he didn't notice it, but there was a snake during the breach of the wall. The snake came out of there, jumped at Bar Kochba, twirled around him, and killed Bar Kochba. One of the Kutim went and chopped Bar Kochba's head and went and brought him to Hadrian. And the Jews did not surrender. The Jews fought till the very end, and it was a brutal death for the Jews. In fact, everybody except for two people that survived the entire massacre. It was over 500,000 Jews that died on that day. And this is one of the things that we mourn on the 9th of Av. It happened the 9th of Av, the same day that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. So during this time, obviously the Roman government was able to take control back of Israel, and it was obviously with much more hatred and against the Jewish people that they did not allow anything. Hadrian says no Torah, no mitzvos, no nothing. You're not allowed to do anything. If anybody is caught studying Torah, you're sentenced to death right away. Now, there is a certain things that the Yossi Glili actually brings it down, and he says if let's say somebody goes and says, "I'm going to kill you if you don't serve Avodah Zarah." So there's three things that you have to rather die than serve. And one of those is someone puts a gun to your head and says, "If you don't serve idols, I'm going to kill you." You have to kill yourself. You have to let yourself be killed. The three things are murder, idolatry, and immorality, sexual immorality, gilui arayot. But he says anything else. So if someone puts a gun to your head and says, "If you don't eat this pork, I'm going to kill you." You're obligated to eat the pork. You eat the pork, and this is, however, if they're doing it in a certain manner. If, however, the purpose, the prosecutor, the reason why they're pointing the gun into your head and making you do a violation is because they want you to that they want to pull you away from God, and they want to turn you away from God. That's the whole purpose. So you're not allowed to do anything. You have to give up your life for everything if it's for that purpose that they're doing it. And Rabbi Akiva says, "Listen," he says, "what can happen if we don't teach our children Torah? look at the Russian population in the past few hundred, it's actually not even a few hundred years, but look at the more, you weren't allowed to teach Torah, you weren't allowed to continue with it, and because of that you see the intermarriage, there's so much that we lost because of that. It says, could you imagine? So Rabbi Akiva saw this, says we can't stop teaching Torah. If we stop teaching Torah, the Jewish nation is going to cease to exist. So he went and he started continue teaching Torah. Rabbi Akiva went and he started teaching Torah. And Hadrian went on a crazy killing spree. In fact, he was walking and a Jew went and a Jew greeted him. He says, "How dare you greet me?" And he went and he killed him. And then he kept on walking, and a few days later, a short while later, and a Jew heard what happened, so he didn't greet him. So he goes to the Jew, "How dare you not greet me?" And he goes and he kills him also. So one of the servants goes over to him and says, "Hadrian, I don't understand." He says, "For him you kill because you didn't greet. Him you kill because you greet. What's going on?" He says, "Hey, Jesus, what do you think it matters?" He says, "I just want to kill them. This is just an excuse." So obviously the Jewish nation will go into tremendous subjugation. And the Rabbi Akiva said he's not going to stop teaching Torah. He's going to continue teaching Torah. And there was a guy by the name of Pappus ben Yehuda. We spoke about him originally, one of the potential marriage partners for Rachel, for Rabbi Akiva's first wife. And Pappus goes to him and says, "Rabbi Akiva," he says, "what are you doing? You're putting yourself in danger. Sakanat nefashot. What are you doing? Why are you putting yourself in danger and teaching Torah?" So Rabbi Akiva says, "Let me tell you a parable." And we're going to finish in a few minutes. We're almost done. So he goes and he says, there was once a fox. This fox came over to water, near the water, and there was a bunch of fishermen trying to catch a bunch of fish for their job, for the business, and the fish was trying to avoid the nets, avoid the hooks. So the fox goes over to the fish and says, "Listen, fish," he says, "come on land, I'll protect you." So the fish says to the fox, "I thought you were the smartest of all the animals." He says, "I should come into land?" He says, "My whole survival is in the water. If I get out of the water, I can't survive." Rabbi Akiva says, our Jewish nation, our whole survival is of the Torah. He says, if you're telling me to stop teaching Torah, we're not going to survive. He says, we need to survive. And he goes and he continues to, and he tells Pappus, I'm going to continue teaching. He says, Kihem chayenu v'orach yameinu. Says that this is the source of our lives is the Torah. And he goes and he continues. And not too far afterwards, Turnus Rufus goes and has Rabbi Akiva arrested for teaching Torah. And he puts him in prison. Somehow Rabbi Yeshua from Gersa was able to go and visit him, one of his students, and he goes and was able to visit him, and he would always bring him water so that he could wash and eat a little bit. So one day that he goes in and he brings like this bucket of water, and the guard goes and he looks and he says, "What's up with all this water you bring in? Let me see how much water you got." And he sees he's bringing a substantial amount of water. So he says, "What? Humans don't need to drink that much water." He takes the water and spills out half of it, and he says, "You can take the rest, the half of it all." So sure, not able to. He goes and he brings his rabbi. Rabbi Akiva, the half of the water, and Rabbi Akiva, and he explains to him, he says, they spilled the other half of the water. So Rabbi Akiva goes and he uses the remaining water to wash his hands before he eats bread. So Rabbi Yeshua says, "Listen, my dear Rabbi," says Rabbi, "if you're going to wash your hands, you're not going to have anything to drink." And we know that that's you can't not drink. Water is a imperative for survival. So he goes and he says, "What am I supposed to do? The sages ordained that we have to wash before we eat bread." He says, "I can't eat bread without washing." And he goes and uses all his water to wash, and then he eats the bread. When the sages heard Rabbi Akiva in his old age, this is right before he died, this is how he's serving God with who knows what how sick and how his health was. It says, imagine how much he would serve God when he was in full of health. So while Rabbi Akiva was in prison, they had a few, he was a leader of the generation, and they had a few things that needed to be discussed, that halachot, that only Rabbi Akiva could go and paskin. But they said they couldn't, Rabbi Yeshua was able to only go because of connections he was able to have. He says, how are we supposed to do it? How are we supposed to get questions to Rabbi Akiva? So they would go and sort of like walk around the prison over there and start screaming out, like, who wants to buy vegetables, who wants to buy this? And then they would scream out also the case that they had, the problem. So there's one particular case that they scream out that there was a woman who was in prison with her brother-in-law, and they needed to do yibum or chalitza, which means they had to marry she married his brother without any kids. So what the brother's supposed to do is either supposed to marry her or give her chalitza, which means not to avoid the whole marriage. So they did that. They were both in prison. They did that, but the problem was they did it without a bezdin. They did it without people watching them. So they didn't know, is this considered good or is this not considered good? So they go and they start selling, we're selling peaches, apples, and this. And what happens to a woman who does chalitza not in presence of any sages? Rabbi Akiva hears this, so he screams back out, "It sounds kosher. Sounds kosher to me." And he's over there, and so he paskins over there. There was another thing that came up they had a question. So we know that there's lunar years, right? I believe in every what was it, every 19 years or 7 leap years in the Jewish calendar. So in order to, because we go by the lunar calendar and the solar calendar is a difference of I think about 11 days. So every few years, about every about 3-ish years, depending on the thing, we have another leap year to compensate. So this way, all our holidays fall out in the same period of time. Pesach falls out in Aviv. Everything falls out in a particular time. This is why the for example, Islam, which also follows the lunar calendar, their Ramadan, for example, always changes throughout the year because it makes a cycle. So the problem was that Hadrian, during all this prosecution to the Jewish nation, they weren't able to institute leap years. You can't just be like, okay, now it's the time for the sages of Chachamim will come together and they would institute a leap year. The problem was through all these years of subjugation, they couldn't. They missed a few leap years, and now they need to make it up. The question is that you can't make up one leap year after another unless you have the big Chachamim come together and discuss it. And who is the big Chachamim at the time? Rabbi Akiva. So they brought up this case over here in front of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva says that you are able to go and do a leap year after another. I believe they did 3 leap years in a row. But each leap year, the Bezdin would have to establish them each time. You can't do it every year, they're going to have to reestablish it. So a short while later was Erev Yom Kippur. And they decided that Rabbi Akiva was going to die. And that was his end. And they take out Rabbi Akiva, and they weren't just going to hang him, they were going to torture him to death. And the way that Rabbi Akiva died was they took this iron comb, like imagine these like sharp thongs of iron. They burnt it, they put it on fire, and then they tied Rabbi Akiva down, and they took him and they combed his flesh off. And as they were combing his flesh off, he was sitting there, not uttering a word, not screaming, not in pain. So the sages, the students were nearby. They were obviously everyone has to go and be present to this. And it says, Rabbi Akiva, what are you doing? He says, what's going on over here? And Rabbi Akiva says, he goes over to them. He's even teaching them while he's being tortured to death. Can you imagine the pain of the torture of having burning iron going through your body and being combed, your skin being combed, and you can only Rahman imagine. And what Rabbi Akiva says, instead of screaming, he's thinking, and he tells the students, we always learn, we say in Kriyat Shema, you have to serve your God with all your heart and with all your soul. So how are you supposed to serve God with all your soul? It's always bothered me. And now I realize I could serve with all my soul because even on my death I could serve God. And with that he goes and he puts his hand over his eyes to say Kriyat Shema. And he says Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And when he finishes Echad, that's when his soul goes up to the next world. And he says, he passed away on Echad just like he was one with God. He went and he was later buried. It is an interesting story how he went to bury. We don't have the time for it for today. But he was later buried in Tveria. Also, his wife, Rachel, is also buried in Tveria. Now, although the entire Rabbi Akiva was a Gadol Adar, the biggest giant of the generation, and while it was a terrible passing in the mourning of the Jewish nation, unfathomable. The Rabbi Akiva, even though he passed away in a very horrific death, he didn't. His words, his Torah still lives on, and it lives on when we're learning. The Torah that we're learning is only b'zchut him. You look at Rabbi Akiva. You look at somebody with what he went through in life. You don't realize, you're reading a Gemara, you hear stories about, you don't realize what this person went through. You don't realize that this person came from an ignorant shepherd, a penniless shepherd, didn't have any money, worked for somebody, hated the Chachamim. And look at what he became. And he didn't become it easy. He didn't have it easy. He went, and even though he married a wealthy woman, he was struck at penniless. He was poor, and he lived his life in poverty for a majority of it. And studying Torah day in and day out, and persevering, and constantly tearing apart the Torah, saying about, okay, why is this over here? Why is this over there? And because of that, he became who he became. He went, and even after he became that, you think it stopped over there, everything was cruising for him? He went through troubles, and he started going and traveling throughout the entire, who knows how many travels that he had to go through for the Jewish nation. He gave up everything for the Jewish nation. And he not only did he give up everything at the end, when it seems like he gave up anything, he really gave to the Jewish nation. He really gave everything for the Jewish nation. And we have to take this lesson, this amazing story that we hear from Rabbi Akiva. There are so many lessons that we can, the greatness is all in here. It says, you want to become great? Learn from Rabbi Akiva. Learn how, let's take a few lessons. We have 2 minutes, let's take a few lessons. Number 1, never give up. You see over here, Rabbi Akiva never gave up. He lost 24,000 students. Easy could have given up. In fact, we can backtrack it. He started learning when he was 40 years old. You know how many people says, listen, I'm too old. What am I going to start sitting and learning Torah? I'm already set in my ways. People say that when they're 20, 30, 40, 50. Who knows? Rabbi Akiva was 40 years old, didn't even know how to read. And he says, no, I'm not going to give up. And he goes and he perseveres. And he goes and finally he goes and he reaches. He reaches the top. He reaches the tippy top. 24,000 students. God says, I'm taking them all back. He takes all the 24,000 students. another reason to give up. No, but he doesn't. He keeps on going. And because of that, he was able to continue with his 5 students. And he was able to continue and spread the Torah to the entire nation. Besides the fact that he started off being extremely poor. He says, listen, I'm going to do what I have to do. And if you realize, he ended off an extremely wealthy man. Very, very wealthy. He started off with nothing. He ended off with everything, spiritually and physically. We titled these series From Rags to Riches. Because he went from rags, from nothing, spiritually and physically, to everything. He went to the riches spiritually and physically. And may we internalize these lessons. May we actually grow from these things. And may we actually also learn from the students. And what does Rabbi Akiva say? He says you have to love your friend like yourself. The lessons that we have, we could go until today, until tomorrow, and it's running late. So B'ezrat Hashem, may we internalize this. May we learn from Rabbi Akiva. And may we only grow from this. And may we realize the greatness that can be achieved from each and every single one of us. Chazak u'Baruch.